going to go through the SSI and work incentives, and I'm going to kind of hit the high points here. Again, there's a lot of information, and we're going to give you the basics, and there's going to be time to stop and ask questions. So if something isn't, making sense along the way, put some in the chat box, or, jot down your questions so that we can catch up with you as we go along. So to start with, to explain a little bit about Social Security, there's actually two different types of Social Security. There are the Social Security Disability Insurance, or Title II benefits. That's Social Security that if you're working and you're paying into the system, they're withholding a little bit out of your paycheck, your Social Security withholding. And so then if you become disabled, or a parent or a spouse maybe becomes disabled, then that person can collect on those benefits. That's Social Security Disability Insurance. That's another pot of money and another story that they're going to talk about in a different training. Today, we're just going to talk about Social Security SSI, or Supplemental Security Income. Now, SSI is just what it says, Supplemental Security Income. It's a needs-based program, and it is the payer of last resort. So if you're eligible for any other type of benefit, they're going to have you collect that benefit first. So maybe if you worked a little bit and paid in a little bit of money while you were working, then you may, if you become disabled, collect a little bit of Social Security disability. You may also get some supplemental security income to supplement that. But if there's any other type of benefit that you can access, they're going to have you access that first. So the federal benefit rate for SSI this year is $783 for an individual, or $1,175 for a couple. Again, a person might be receiving less than $783 if they have some other type of income coming in, wages or unearned income, or other type of support. So there's two different types of SSI. Well, SSI comes in children's SSI or adult SSI. So the reason we make that distinction is because Social Security looks at whether someone is disabled differently before age 18 than after 18. So before age 18, they're looking at, does your disability affect your ability to learn or your activities of daily living? Where after 18, they're looking at, does it affect your ability to work and earn an amount of money that you can support yourself? So anyone who's on SSI before age 18, if they're still on SSI when they reach age 18, they will have what's called an age 18 redetermination, and that's where Social Security looks again to see if they meet that criteria for disability under the adult standards. And SSI usually comes out on the first of the month, whereas the Title II benefits or Social Security disability may come out at different times during the month. For couples, if a couple is married or presenting as married, and they both qualify for SSI, then the couple's rate is $1,175. It's less than two $783 checks because Social Security assumes that people are sharing resources. They're only going to have one rent bill or one utility bill, and so that's why it's a lesser amount. As far as resources go, the individual resource limit is $2,000. The couple's resource limit is $3,000, and they're allowed to have one house and one car. I, again, don't understand the one car thing. You'd think two people would each need a car to get to work, but the one car is still the limit. Because SSI is a needs-based program, almost everything counts. So SSI, Supplemental Security Income, is to help people with their food and their shelter. So anything that you have that they determine could be converted into something you could use for food or shelter would count. So how much money you make, how much money you have in the bank, unearned income from different things, all that counts. So what is a resource? Again, we said $2,000 resource limit for individuals, $3,000 for couples. That can be bank accounts, cash, retirement funds, land, stocks, bonds, second home or automobile, certain life insurance policies of over $1,500, anything that can be converted into cash and used for food or shelter is basically counted. What is not a resource? The home that you live in, the land that it sits on, one automobile. I had a family I worked with who got a letter in the mail and said that they were over resources, and they were asked me to take a look at it. I'd been to their place. I knew that they didn't have a lot, if anything. And so we looked at it and said that they had 6 automobiles. Well, he told me, well, you know, those automobiles don't run. They're all broken down. I use them for parts to fix the one automobile that I have. But he had 6 automobiles titled in his name. So on paper, for Social Security purposes, it looked like he had 6 cars. But we had to get something that verified that those weren't running automobiles and that they didn't count as a resource. Certain trusts, special needs trusts that are get a little complicated, but you know, if they aren't something that you can access and use for food or shelter, that may be something that can not count as a resource. Burial funds up to $10,000, cash if it's for burial up to $1,500. Your income tax refund when you get it is not going to be counted as a resource for 9 months. They counted your income when you were working as gross income, so they don't count that money twice. They do give you 9 months to spend it down though. And money that's in an ABLE account. And we won't go a lot into ABLE accounts right now, but other than the fact that they're a very good thing. If you have somebody who's on a program that looks at resources, ABLE accounts, special accounts that are set up for disability related expenses, you can have up to $100,000 in those accounts. So that's a good option for people that are in that resource limit. And a lot of other little exclusions and loopholes that are in the POMS. POMS is the Policy and Operation Manual for Social Security. And if it were actually a manual, it would be like 12 feet thick. But it's on computer, and it's so vastly complicated that people in Social Security don't even understand it. But it is the kind of place where Social Security representatives go to get the answer for each person's individual situation. So a lot of times there may be something specific that they have to dig in there and find the rule that applies. What is income? So any unearned income, like we said, your Social Security disability check, a retirement check, child support, things like that. Earned income, earnings from self-employment or from work. They also count in-kind support and maintenance or food or shelter provided by someone else, and deemed income from another person. And we're going to go into those in a little more detail here in a second. So what is not income? Medical and social services. So for example, let's say that vocational rehabilitation paid for an adaptive device for someone. That money that they received to get that adaptive device from voc rehab wouldn't count as additional income, because that would be a social support. Attendant residential services, again, your income tax refund for the first 9 months, loans that you have to pay back. If somebody's paying a bill that is not food or shelter, clothing, and then those other specific exceptions that may apply to some people. Okay, so deeming. Deeming is when income or resources from someone else who has a legal obligation to provide the food and shelter to that person are counted, and that can impact SSI. So for example, if someone, you may have child who's 16 years old who has a disability, but they're not on SSI. That's probably because their parents, they're counting their parents' income and their parents' resources. And so they're counting that whole household, and then that child would not be eligible for SSI. So parent to minor child deeming. Spouse to spouse, you may have a husband who's disabled, but the wife is working and making good money, so as that household would not be eligible because they consider that deeming to the spouse. Or sponsored alien, which is a case where if someone moves to this country and they're getting established and looking for citizenship and they're having to stay with a sponsor, that sponsor has a legal obligation to provide their food and shelter. So Social Security figures out the deeming formula, and it's a complicated formula. So even as CWICs, we don't get into calculating that amount for people because there's just too many variables. They're looking at the number of people in the house and the cost of the household and different things like that that they're figuring in that formula. When someone gets a letter, like say a child who's 16 and the parent is their authorized representative, they'll get a letter that says this is the formula that we used to determine whether you're eligible for SSI, and that formula is on there. So you can go over it with them and look at it and see if it looks accurate. But you really have to work with Social Security office in order to make those adjustments to deeming. In-kind support and maintenance is when someone doesn't give cash, but they still support a person. So that can still reduce a person's SSI amount. So for example, you may have a student living at home over 18 and the parents are providing all of their living expenses. That would be considered in-kind support and maintenance. In-kind support and maintenance are things that are given directly. So if you're paying somebody's room and board, if you're paying their rent or their mortgage, paying their property taxes, paying their utilities like heating and gas, electric or water, sewer or garbage. So examples of unearned income that can count are your Social Security disability check, cash that you have on hand or cash that you're paid or given, pensions, unemployment insurance, benefits, alimony, and again, as I mentioned, like child support. If a child is under 18 and the parents are getting the child support, they're going to count a third of that in the deeming formula. But if they're over 18 and the child support's still coming in, they're going to count that 100% as an unearned income toward that person. Excluded unearned income, again, the tax refund, other assistance that a person may receive like food stamps, low-income energy assistance, infrequent or regular small checks like if somebody goes and mows their neighbor's yard for $20, if that's a one-time thing, they're not going to take the time to adjust your SSI check over that. Formal loans that you have an obligation to repay, scholarships, grants used for tuition or books. So unearned income reduces SSI dollar for dollar after the first $20 general income exclusion. In the example, Mary gets SSI and she receives alimony of $200 every month. So when they're calculating how much she's going to get on SSI, they say, okay, she's got $200, she gets this unearned income. They take the $20 general income exclusion, which leaves $180 unearned income that they're going to count. They subtract that from her 783 and her new SSI amount is 591. So it can get kind of confusing to determine why is somebody's SSI amount less than it should be. Why is it not 783? Is it because of unearned income, deemed income, in-kind support and maintenance? really every situation is different. And so there's no one size fits all formula for how they calculate it. So you really have to know the details about what's going on with that person's situation. And it varies a lot depending on what's going on. So supplemental security income and employment. SSI earnings are calculated with a formula where deductions are subtracted from the gross income to determine your countable income. And you get the standard deductions, which are the general income exclusion that we talked about before, earned income exclusion, an additional $65 off of earnings. And there are some other deductions and exclusions that we'll talk about in a little bit. So it's not as complicated as it sounds. Let's look at a couple examples. Let's say somebody's working at minimum wage, $9.30 an hour. And like in the first example, they're working part-time. So they're working 20 hours a week. $9.30 an hour times 20 hours a week comes $186. We take that times 4.33 weeks. And the reason you do that is to kind of account for those months when there may be more than one pay period in a month. So to average it out, we take it times 4.33. So working part-time, their gross monthly earnings are going to be around $805. If they're working full-time at minimum wage, 40 hours a week, $372 times 4.33 weeks, they're making around $1,610 gross monthly earnings. So the gross monthly income, looking at the part-time example, first they get the $20 general income exclusion, which brings it down to $785. Then they get the $65 additional earned income exclusion, which takes off another $65. Then they divide it by 2 because they only count half. So that leaves the monthly countable income around $360. In the full-time example, again, $1,610, take away the $20 general income exclusion, take away the additional $65 earned income exclusion, divide that by 2 because they're only counting half of it. So their monthly countable income is around $762. So if you take the federal benefit rate, SSI, the base rate of $783, you take away on the part-time example, the countable income of $360, that leaves their adjusted SSI benefit rate at $422. On the full-time example, if their base rate $783 minus their $762 of countable income, leaves their adjusted SSI check at $20. So the bottom line, kind of the monthly income amount that you want to look at is their earnings that they made working part-time, $805, plus their adjusted SSI benefit of $422, leaves them a total monthly income of $1,228. Definitely better than $783. And if they were working full-time, they're making $1,610 gross working. They get a $20 SSI check, so they have a monthly income of $1,630, more than twice what they were making on the SSI. So there is a break-even point. There's a point where your SSI does eventually go to 0, and kind of working the formula backwards, that comes out to $1,651. So if you were to reach that amount, your SSI would be down to 0. But that doesn't mean that you're off of SSI. It just means that your SSI goes into suspension, because for that month, you would have earnings that would reduce your SSI to 0. So it would go into suspension. And if maybe the next month your earnings drop down, then they recalculate the formula and your SSI would kick back in. So it goes into suspension as long as it's not in suspension more than 12 consecutive months, then you know, it would vary depending on month to month if your wages went up or down. The magic word that everybody needs to remember. So hopefully nobody got up and went to the bathroom or is refilling their coffee right now, because we're at the magic word.
Can you say it, Barry? I had someone email me and say that they're just on the phone.
Yes. The magic word is tree. T-R-E-E. Tree. There was my spelling word for the day. Now, Brooke, do we want to go to some questions that have come in at this point? Because I don't have my chat screen where I can see it. So.
Yeah, this would be a perfect time to stop for questions, Barry. I don't have any questions in the chat box yet. I just have one comment. I know this is a different venue and it's always hard because we can't see everybody. So just a request to perhaps slow down a little bit. But we can open it up to questions. If you have a question for Barry, you will need to unmute your line and ask the question, and then remember to mute yourself again after you're done asking your question. So we'll go ahead and open it up.
Barry, this is Cindy with Transition Project. Did you say the suspension for 12 consecutive months?
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to make sure I got that right. Thanks.
And I do have a couple questions now, Barry. So I'll go ahead and read those. The first question is that they're wondering what they need to do with the words. So when you complete the evaluation, in order to get the certificate indicating that you attended the training, you will need to enter those words on the evaluation. And then there's a question that asks, will you, this is from Nancy Miller, will you talk about how the suspension affects Medicaid?
Yes, and I know that Tynell will be addressing that more in the Medicaid section of the presentation. So I'll just kind of give you the brief answer to that, which is if you were at that break-even point and your SSI went to zero, your Medicaid would not stop. Because of the work incentive called 1619B. If work were the reason why your SSI went to zero, and that is one of the factors of that, is that your work income has to be the reason why your SSI went to zero. If that were the case, then yes, you would get to maintain your Medicaid, and then your SSI may be in suspension for a period of time. But you would not lose the Medicaid as long as you were approved for the 1619B.
Thanks, Barry. And we have another question here from Brooke Keel. I was wondering how to get vehicles out of someone's name when they have more than one.
Well, I suppose there's a lot of ways to do that, and I know that gets a little tricky because you don't want it to look like somebody's just getting rid of resources, to get things, to make it look like they don't have resources. So, I guess I kind of hesitate to advise people on ways to do that. If they're in a situation where they've got 4 cars and Social Security knows that they have 4 cars, if they're getting rid of the car, Social Security is then going to say, well, then what happened to them? Did somebody buy them? Did you get money for them? If they gifted them to somebody else and they didn't make any money on it, that may be an option. But again, that would probably be something it's kind of one of those individualized things that you really need to get the answer from Social Security on. But in that case of that family that I worked with, their cars weren't even functioning cars. So we were just basically, proving to Social Security, what was already true, that they didn't have cars. So I know that doesn't exactly answer the question, but that's close as I could get.
Okay, if there's anyone who would like to ask a question themselves, please unmute and ask at this time.
Barry, this is Dolores with Disability Rights. I am just wondering if a person has both unearned and earned income, do they calculate the unearned first and then use that number as they calculate the earned?
Yes, and I think that'll make a little more sense when we get a little further into this presentation, because we're going to look at some calculation sheets. And I don't believe that we look at an example exactly like that on our calculation sheet, but I know they do when they do the concurrent presentation. But in a quick answer to your question is, yes, in the top section of the little calculation sheet that you'll see later, they deduct the unearned income, they take the $20 general income exclusion, and then you move down to the next section of the page, which is the earned income calculation, and then they take the 65 off and work down from there. So that'll make a little more sense when you actually see the calculation sheet.
Thank you, Barry. Are there other questions at this time? Thank you for remembering to remute yourself, Dolores. Okay, I don't see any other questions in the chat box at this time either, Barry. I will just add a couple of things in case you didn't see it in the chat, but if you put your email in the chat, I have sent you the handout, so check your email, please. And then again, if you didn't register previously, please go out and register, because that's how we'll send you the evaluation link, and that you'll then get your certificate for attending the training. And remember, there will be 2 words shown during the presentation that you'll need to include on the evaluation. So the first one is showing on the screen right now, and as Barry said, it's the word tree for those of you who just joined by phone. So I'll turn it back over to you, Barry.
Okay. So I apologize for moving along quickly there. Again, like it's different just talking to a screen, but I will slow down and try to make it a little more understandable. So what does earned income count? Earned income, or when does earned income count? It always counts at the time that you earn it. So at the time you receive it, I'm sorry. Not at the time you earn it, at the time you receive it. So that's why it can really make a difference if you have a month where you have 3 pay periods in it. And I know I was working with some folks this summer who worked at some of the areas up in the hills, and we discovered as the summer went on that, like I think it was the month of July, there were 3 pay periods in there. And so, I mean, to Social Security, it doesn't matter when you earned that money, it was when you received it. So if you received 3 paychecks in July, when you report your earnings the first week of August, yes, you have to report all 3 of those paychecks. So, you know, that month is going to show that you received more income. But then again, the next month, your income won't be that much. So it can go up and down like that. But as far as the reporting the income, again, I just want to reiterate that that's really important, that people are reporting their wages the first week of the following month from when they actually receive it. So if they're getting paychecks the month of May, then the first week of June, they need to report that gross income that they earned in May. And so we're going to cover some of the work incentives that we kind of mentioned a little bit earlier. The impairment related work expense, or IRWEs, blind work expense, or BWEs, student earned income exclusion, it doesn't have a catchy name, pass or plan to achieve self-support, Section 301, which is a little more complicated, but it's a very important work incentive. and the 1619B that we talked a little bit about, and I know Tynell's going to cover, I believe, more in the Medicaid section. When someone gets to that point where they work until their SSI is down to 0, then with the 1619B work incentive, they're able to keep their Medicaid. So impairment-related work expenses, or IRWEs, these are expenses that someone has to pay out of their own pocket in order to work. So they must be related to their primary disability or an established secondary disability. And the IRWE has to be approved by Social Security first, and they have to have receipts showing that they are the ones that actually paid it. So examples of possible IRWEs could be medical appointment co-pays, prescription co-pays, prosthetic devices, certain transportation costs, if those are specialized transportation costs. So in other words, if somebody is taking Dial-A-Ride, which is you know, a disability service that where they come right to your door to transport you to work, that is a specialized transportation cost. If they're just getting on the regular bus route that anybody else can get on, it's not a specialized transportation cost. Cost of adaptive devices for automobiles, and many other possibilities. So where do the IRWEs fit in that formula that we were talking about? IRWEs are deducted from the countable income before it's divided by 2. So an IRWE is not subtracted from the countable income dollar for dollar like it is in the Social Security disability world. And that'll make more sense when you see it on the calculation sheet. So for example, Mary pays $100 a month for specialized transportation to and from work. And she gets paid $500 gross from her job. So in the formula, she's getting $500 earned income. They take the $20 general income exclusion, subtract the $65 earned income exclusion. Then they subtract the $100 that she's paying for her specialized transportation cost. Then it's divided by 2 because they're only counting half of that. So her countable income is down to $157.50. So blind work expenses. If a person's primary disability is statutory blindness, then they can use blind work expenses to deduct the cost of a large list of items. And unlike IRWEs, blind work expenses are deducted after the dividing by 2 on the calculation sheet. So blind work expenses actually deducted dollar for dollar from your countable income. So that can deduct the countable income down quite a bit, sometimes to the point where none of the income that you're earning is even counting against your SSI. So types of blind work expenses are basically anything that you could normally have counted as an IRWE, also would count as a BWE, but it would probably be much more beneficial to use it as a blind work expense because of how it's calculated. State and federal taxes, union dues, mandatory pensions, cost of uniforms, reader services, driver services, if you got to take Lyft or Uber, cost of service animals, child care, transportation, meals consumed at work, adaptive equipment, so a lot broader category. So in Mary's example with the blind work expense, she's making $500 a month. She has $100 in various blind work expenses, taxes or whatever. So she gets $500 earned income. They subtract $20 general income exclusion. They subtract the $65 earned income exclusion. Then they divide it by 2. So they're only counting half of that. So it's down to 207. Then they subtract the blind work expenses. So that lowered her $500 earned income down to only $107.50 in countable. Student earned income exclusion. So to qualify, a person must be under the age of 22 and regularly attending school. Now that's the kind of variable that sometimes gets a little tricky because there's a lot of different things that count as regularly attending school. You could be in a transition program, attending school in the morning and training on the job in the afternoon. You could be a Job Corps, you could be homeschooled. So there's a lot of things that when Social Security looks at it, may be approved for regularly attending school, but that's kind of the catch. You actually have to show Social Security that that's what you're doing, is regularly attending school according to their guidelines. And if you're approved, you can be excluded up to $1,900 this year of earned income per month when Social Security figures your SSI, up to a maximum of $7,670 in a year. So in Mary's example, Mary's earning $500 a month, but she's also attending a community college with enough hours to qualify for student earned income exclusion. The $500 earnings minus the $500 student earned income exclusion, which means out of her possible $1,900 per month that she's allowed, means that there's no deduction at all to her SSI because they don't count any of her $500. It's all excluded because of the student earned income exclusion. And so they won't, it won't adjust her SSI check at all until she's over the maximum amount for the year, the $7,670. A plan for achieving self-support is a PASS. It's a written plan which allows a beneficiary to put aside income other than their SSI into an account to save for an employment goal. Money in the PASS is then excluded as income when determining the SSI. But the money in the PASS has to be spent on items needed to achieve that employment goal. The most common reasons for a PASS are to pay for education costs, to start a business, long-term job coaching, transportation, like an adaptive van or something like that to go to work. Most common income put into a PASS are the wages that you're earning. Maybe someone also has some Social Security disability insurance money, savings that they need to spend down, or some in-kind support and maintenance or some deeming that is provided from someone else. A PASS must be in writing on the official Social Security Form 545. It must be an employment goal. That's a very important part of that, an employment goal. So going to college, getting a degree as a surgical technologist and working in a hospital, that's an employment goal. Getting a car, it's not an employment goal. So that's an important point to start, is that they really need to focus on that is their goal. It has to have a reasonable start date and end date, typically 18 to 24 months. It has to have a broken down list of expenses that they need to achieve that goal. And they have to be able to prove that the money that they're using for that PASS isn't coming out of their food and shelter and money that they would need to support themselves. And when they complete the PASS, they need to show that that's going to result in them no longer needing benefits or having their benefits significantly reduced. So once a PASS is approved by the Social Security PASS cadre, they're called, the beneficiary opens a separate bank account for the PASS funds, and the beneficiary has to keep an account of all the money that's received and all the money that's spent, because the PASS cadre will then review that every 6 months at least and look to make sure that money is being spent appropriately. So I guess we're at the end of this section.
Just a couple of points that I would like to add to what Barry just presented. For blind work expense, that is only work incentive, that can be used for somebody who Social Security has determined is statutorily blind. So that is a really important piece. For example, you may know that the person is blind, but if it's not marked as such, based on Social Security's rules in their documentation, they may not be allowed to use the blind work expense. So that's always something to make sure it is coded as statutory blind with Social Security. And then, as Barry mentioned, with student earned income exclusion and the requirement to be regularly attending school, the general rule of thumb is that if you're attending college, it has to be at least 8 hours per week per semester. And then in grades 7 through 12, it's at least 12 hours per week. Now, that's the general rule of thumb. There are some differences and some exceptions, of course, to every rule. And different offices look at that information differently, but just as a general rule of thumb, those are a couple of things you can remember with student earned income exclusion. Barry, we have one question in the chat box that I'm going to read, and then we'll open it up to those who want to ask other questions. The question is from Cindy Kirschman. If an individual is unable to pass the driver's test due to an intellectual ability, they don't have a physical disability, and then they would need to use the accessible busing system because of that. Could they request that cost as an IRWE to Social Security?
Well, that's something that with each IRWE, it's kind of like with the pass. I mean, and with a lot of things, they have to be approved by Social Security. So, the best bet is to get all of that information together that shows their need for that specialized transportation, and then take it to your Social Security representative and see if you can get it approved. Again, there's a lot of differences between Social Security offices and even between different Social Security representatives in how they determine that. As a general rule, if somebody has to have specialized transportation in order to work, that would count. But again, there's a lot of gray area there that you really have to have your local Social Security office determine that.
Actually, this is Cindy again. What I was thinking is you have an individual who can't pass their driver's test, needs somebody to give them a ride to work, but doesn't need the accessibility busing. Can they use just taking the regular taxi as an IRWE or not? It has to be. Do you know what I'm saying?
I think I know what you're saying. Yes, if somebody's just in a situation where they can't drive, but they have to, get to work one way or another. And what I've ran into just in my personal experience here in Rapid City is that there's a bus route, and people can learn how to use the bus, and people can get from point A to point B some way if they need to. So that transportation barrier isn't necessarily disability related, or at least that's how Social Security ruled in that particular. But that's I can't say that that's the definitive answer, because
right, in different communities where they may not have those bus routes.
Right.
Thanks.
I'm sorry.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, Heather.
Okay. I know that Rapid City does have a bus route, but what I've run into is there are folks that have to go to work where the buses will not transport. In that case, could we possibly get approval for transportation to be considered an IRWE?
Well, I think what Social Security would look at is, are they needing to use that other transportation service because of where their job is located, or are they needing to use it because of their disability? And so it may come down to that. Again, that's not, there's a lot of variables with that IRWE and transportation thing. So every person's situation is a little different. But again, if the primary reason why they need to have a different kind of transportation is just because their job is somewhere else, well, we kind of all run into that issue in one way or another, right? So that's not necessarily disability related. So that's just kind of something to keep in mind when you're getting your facts together to go to Social Security. And there's actually a form that you can get that, that fills out that says, I'm requesting an IRWE, and it kind of breaks it down on asking those questions. And it's good to have that to fill out and take with you when you go.
And the moral of the story with IRWEs, like Barry said, is that they have to be approved by Social Security. There's no harm in requesting one. So in the situation that you just described, Heather, there's no harm in requesting it and just making sure that you have all the documentation available, like Barry mentioned, to provide to Social Security. There is another question in the chat box, Barry, from Megan Anderson. If someone qualifies for paratransit and their job is outside city limits and they cannot take the city bus, would this qualify?
Well, if they're eligible for the paratransit, I mean, I would definitely use that as your primary reason for why they are taking it. My understanding is that, location or not, if you have to use the paratransit transportation in order to get to work, then that is a specialized transportation cost. So, with just that much information to go on, that's what I would say. But again, like Brooke said, it never hurts to give it a try. Definitely get your information together, get your costs together, your receipts that you're actually paying it yourself, and that the reason why you have to take this specialized transportation is because of your disability and so that you can get to work and run it past Social Security.
Are there any other questions for Barry? You can simply unmute your line and ask the question if you like. Okay, I would like to add there's still going to be time to ask questions. So if you think of other questions, you can certainly ask them. We are going to, after Tynell speaks, have some practice using the calculation sheet and some work incentives. And then also, based on some of the questions that you've asked, you might need some additional assistance submitting the request to Social Security, and that's why the benefit specialists are there to help you and the beneficiaries you're working with requests such as those. On the list of documents that were in the email that was sent to you is a listing of the benefit specialists and their contact information. So please don't ever hesitate to contact one of them. They're there to help you and help the beneficiaries. Okay, Tynell.
All right. So everyone kind of knows, when you get SSI, the healthcare that comes along with that is Medicaid. So that connection between those two, the eligibility is similar. You have to have a disability and low income to qualify for both SSI and Medicaid. In South Dakota, our Medicaid eligibility is automatic. So when a person qualifies for SSI or they're deemed eligible for SSI, that Medicaid automatically comes with theirs, with their SSI. So people don't need to apply. They don't need to do anything. As soon as they qualify for SSI, a message is sent to DSS and they're eligible for Medicaid as well. So the biggest thing that we hear as benefit specialists is that worry about losing benefits when people want to go to work or when they're considering work. There's a lot of misconception that if people return to work, they're going to make too much money and lose their Medicaid. So that is something that we hear a ton, and that's a big factor in people considering returning to work. So what's going to happen to your Medicaid when you go to work? So if someone's receiving an SSI check, like we said, they're automatically eligible for Medicaid. Even if that check is a few dollars, they're still eligible for Medicaid. If they start to work and their employment income gets to the point that their SSI drops to zero, there's work incentives where they are able to keep that Medicaid. So it's kind of a safety net. So it's called 1619B. That's what the work incentive is called. So if someone's working and their wages are going up, their SSI is going down. If they get to zero, they're making so much money that their SSI is zero. That's where 1619B will kick in. It's a super wonderful work incentive, and it has a pretty high income limit, which is great. So how exactly does 1619B work? So like I said, when an SSI beneficiary's earnings are increasing, their income's going up, their SSI check's going down till they get to the point that their SSI goes to zero, 1619B would kick in. In 2020, so this year, the income limit is $37,055. So an individual can make up to $37,055 and still keep their Medicaid through 1619B. So there are individuals can request individualized thresholds and get an even higher amount. So that usually happens if someone has really big medical costs that they need to pay in order to work. So if you have meds that are coming out of pocket, just certain medical costs that you're paying every month, then you can get that threshold increased and make even more than $37,055. Social Security makes this determination whether you're eligible for 1619B or not. So, the eligibility criteria for 1619B, like I said, your benefit would have to be zero as a result of earnings. If your benefit, if the SSI benefit is reduced or is taken away, like Barry had talked about suspension for being over resource limit, things like that, you wouldn't qualify for 1619B. It's just if your earnings bring your benefit to zero. You have to have your gross earnings below $37,055 or whatever individual threshold amount you have. Your disability has to still be there. So you still have to have a disabling condition or continue to be blind. Most disabilities aren't going to go away. You need to have Medicaid in order to work, which is most people. If you go to work and don't have Medicaid, a lot of times that's you're no longer going to be able to work if you don't have those health insurance to help pay for your medications and things like that. You have to be unable to afford the benefits equivalent to those received if not working. So what that means is you have to, so even though you're making more money, that your SSI is zero, it's saying that if you still won't be able to afford your medical care if you were not, like if you wouldn't be able to afford your medical care without that. And then you have to meet all the other requirements for SSI. So you still have to meet those, the resource limits. You have to, keep your resources under $2,000. So maintaining 1619B. So you have to stay on that threshold, like we said. You still must report your income to SSA monthly so that they can ensure that you're staying under that threshold. Like I said, you got to keep your resources under the $2,000 limit or $3,000 for couples. And then unearned income can impact eligibility. So that would be social or SSDI pensions, interest, unemployment, or your spouse's income. So those things can also affect your eligibility for 1619B. So if you wanted to, if you have an individual who has, extremely high medical costs and you want to see if they would qualify for an individual threshold, that standard threshold doesn't always apply. So if you have that person that has expensive medical costs, you could request an individual threshold from SSA. And again, you'd have to be approved for that, and you would have to show why they would need that extra, that higher threshold. So we would be saying, even though this person is making $38,000 and they wouldn't qualify for 1619B, their medical costs are so much that even though they're making a lot of money, they aren't actually taking that in their pocket. So they're still struggling to, provide for their food and shelter. So expedited reinstatement. This is another work incentive for SSI or for SSI recipients. We don't see this very often because we have 1619B and that income threshold is so high. None of us have seen this before with SSI, but I'm still going to tell you about it just in case. Like I said, it's really rare for an SSI beneficiary to reach this point because 1619B kicks in and they can make $37,000 and still be eligible for Medicaid. But what EXR does is if someone loses their SSI and Medicaid because their earnings are above that 1619B threshold, they can use this work incentive if they need to get their SSI back. The EXR is kind of like that quick back in. So if I am no longer getting my SSI and I'm no longer getting my Medicaid, I can jump right back in if for some reason I have to quit my job or my hours have to be reduced a lot due to my disability. If your cash benefit and your 1619B eligibility is gone for 12 months. So if I am working above that and a whole year passes by, I'm been not getting my SSI check, I have not been getting my Medicaid, then that connection's completely lost, so it's broken. So it's kind of like a kite. You're holding on to your kite string. I think that's how we explained it with our cards. After 12 months, we let that kite string go and we're no longer connected. That kite is off and we can't just jump back on. So if someone loses SSI for another reason besides employment income, EXR is not an option. So if you lose your SSI because your resources are too high, then EXR, you're not able to do that quick jump back on. You're not going to be reinstated quickly. You're going to have to go through that application process again after the 12 months. Because like Barry talked about, they give you a little bit of time, you know, that 12-month period where they give you that time to spend down where you're still connected with the kite string. But if after those 12 months, if your kite string is cut because of resources, then you're not able to just jump back on with EXR. All right, do we want to stop for questions?
Sure, we can stop there for questions. If anybody has questions about 1619B or Medicaid, 1619B is a type of Medicaid. You can either type them in the chat box or you can ask them now. Remember, you'll need to unmute yourself.
This is Dolores with Disability Rights. I just wanted to make sure I understood that last part about the expedited reinstatement. So will that still help you after those 12 months, after you've kind of lost that connection? If then you need it again, does the expedited still come into play after those 12 months or?
So Brooke, correct me if I'm wrong, but no, you would have to reapply again.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any in the chat box right now, Tynell.
Okay. All right, so the next thing we're going to move to is we're just going to talk briefly about people who get both SSI or Title or SSDI, which is Title II, and SSI. As Brooke said, next week we're going to cover the SSDI section, but we wanted to give people a little bit of information in case for some reason they can't get on that call. You know, talking about Social Security isn't that fun. Learning about it isn't that fun because everything's so complicated. And, you know, when you guys were asking questions, as Barry said, you know, it kind of just depends. Things depend on the office that you're working with. Things depend on people's, you know, everything is very individualized. So it's hard for us to give black and white answers. So we just worked with people on SSI, and now I'm going to introduce you to people who get both, and it's even more complicated. So they're individuals who receive both SSI and SSDI, or a Title II benefit. We call these beneficiaries concurrent beneficiaries. And this will happen when someone receives a lower SSDI check and have little to no assets. So they'll qualify for a little bit of SSI to get them up to that federal benefit rate that Barry had talked about in his SSI section. So how does a beneficiary qualify for both? The disability definition for both SSI and SSDI are the same as Barry talked about. So if a person is qualifying for SSDI, then they're automatically qualified under, you know, the disability definition for SSI. Most people who qualify for SSDI are going to have income or assets that are too high for SSI. So if you remember when Barry was going through some of those examples, I think Mary had a little bit of alimony or something like that, that brought her SSI down. So most people who are receiving an SSDI check, that's counted as unearned income, as Barry said. So that's going to be too high. It's going to be higher than the amount that SSI would be anyway, so they wouldn't get anything. But there are those few people who don't have a very high SSDI check. And then those are the ones that SSI can step in and get them up to that federal benefit rate, or a little bit more than that federal benefit rate, as long as their income and assets are low enough. So they still have to qualify for, or still have to stay under that $2,000 resource limit. So the average SSDI beneficiary, their check is $1,258. So even if that person has less than $2,000 in assets, their check would still be zero. Going back to what Barry walked you through, and what we'll go through is SSDI is unearned income when it comes to SSI. So if we take that average check amount of $1,258, subtract the general income exclusion, that brings their countable income down to $1,238. That's going to be more than that federal benefit rate of $783, so they wouldn't be eligible for SSI. But if that SSDI check is lower, then that's where we would get SSI. So say someone only has an SSDI check of $400, we would take that general income exclusion of $20, going to bring their unearned income down to $380. Then if they're not working, so the only other income they're getting is SSDI, we would take their the federal benefit rate of $783, subtract that countable unearned income, and their SSI check would be $403. So when you add together the SSDI and the SSI for someone who's a concurrent, it's always going to be $20 more than the federal benefit rate. Because if you think about it, we have that general income exclusion subtracting 20. So when we add them together, as long as there's no back pay or any other deductions, then it's always going to be 20 more. So that's why this year it would be 803 when you add together their SSI and SSDI. So then if you think about it that way, if someone's receiving a Title II benefit or SSDI, if their check is under $803 and they would qualify for SSDI with all the other eligibility requirements, then they should receive some amount of SSI, if you think about it that way. And then every year when the federal benefit rate goes up, you would just take $20 and add it to that amount. But that's a good way to remember is, $20 more than that federal benefit rate. They're getting, if someone's getting SSDI below that, then they should be getting SSI too. So this is our second magic word, and it is building. So write that down, do whatever you need to do with it in order to keep that for your evaluation. So now we need to talk about a little bit about Medicare and Medicaid when someone's a concurrent. So a concurrent beneficiary, they can be eligible for Medicare after the 24-month waiting period, just like anybody else who gets SSDI. In South Dakota, like I said, SSI beneficiaries will automatically get Medicaid, which is good, so that there's some sort of health coverage, during that 24-month waiting period that someone would have to wait before their Medicare kicked in. When someone gets SSI Medicaid, they automatically get assistance to help pay for their Medicare Part B premiums, which is nice. So even we wouldn't have to look at their income to see if they qualified for MSP, which we'll learn about next week. They would just automatically get help for that Medicare Part B premium. Individuals will also be dual eligible for extra help, and extra help helps pay Medicare Part D costs, which would be prescription drug costs. So you'll learn more about Medicare Part B premiums and extra help next week if you're on those. But just know for now, keep in your back pocket that if someone is dually eligible, so they get both SSI and SSDI, they automatically qualify for Part B help and the extra help, which helps pays for prescription drugs. And that'll probably make a little more sense after next week's training than it does now. So how does earned income impact dual or concurrent beneficiaries? So all work incentives will apply to somebody who receives SSI and SSDI. So any of the work incentives that we talked about for SSI are still going to apply for the SSI side here. And then the work incentives you'll learn about next week will apply for people that get SSDI. And they're two separate things still. So people are going to have to make sure to keep those separate. Just because you have an IRWE for SSI and everything's approved and that's all going good, that doesn't mean that SSI is talking to the SSDI person in your office and saying, oh, well, we got this paperwork, I'll just give it to you and you can do the IRWE paperwork automatically. That's not going to happen. There are even times that the SSDI claims rep and the SSI claims rep at Social Security are the same person, and this still isn't going to happen. So the most important thing to remember about work incentives when you're working with concurrent beneficiaries is that you need to report, you need to make sure everything's approved for each SSI and SSDI. So when you're getting the SSI check, all work incentives and rules for that check apply there. It's completely separate. Shut the door. Then you have your SSI check. All rules and work incentives for that apply to just that check. There's no crossover. And then the same thing with Medicare and Medicaid also applies separately to those. There's no mixing, there's no crossover, nothing. So EPMC, which you'll learn about next week in the Medicare section, and then 1619B, those types of work incentives for the healthcare, those are going to be separate as well. So like I said, the biggest thing to remember about this is reporting separately. So you're going to report your wages separately. You're going to report work incentives separately. So you could have an IRWE for both, but you'll need to make sure you turn in that paperwork for both, not just one time. All right.
Okay, thank you, Tynell. I don't see anything in the chat box at this time. Again, that was just a real brief bit of information about SSI and SSDI because some of you may not be able to attend the training next week. And then Dolores, I was just thinking a bit more about your question and I wasn't sure I understood it correctly, but I've been thinking about it a little more. So I think what you were asking is what happens after that 12 months. Is that when they have to reapply for expedited reinstatement of benefits? Actually, what happens, and again, this doesn't happen very often with SSI and 1619B because you have 1619B, but if it would happen, and what you could do is you could apply for expedited reinstatement of benefits within 60 months, which is 5 years of when you were terminated. But again, you have to have, no longer you hadn't been receiving the SSI and the 1619B because of your work, and now you're unable to work because of your disability, unable to work at the level that you were before. So I think that answers the question that you were asking. Okay. So we're gonna switch gears here and we're going to pull up some examples to go through with you. So Brad, if you wanna start pulling up those examples. And then Barry, I thought this might be a good time while he's doing that to mention just maybe a few things about how the stimulus payments affect SSI and the unemployment insurance, the extra pandemic payment that people could potentially be getting during this time.
Yeah, actually, I meant to bring that up when we were going through some of the counting the unearned income, but yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that. I guess the easy answer as far as the stimulus goes is that it does not count. So the economic stimulus, the $1,200 that individuals get, or $2,400 family, or $500 for dependent, those that does not count toward SSI. It doesn't count toward Social Security disability insurance. It doesn't count toward SNAP. It doesn't count toward housing assistance. So basically anything that's income-based, the economic stimulus, that's written right into the CARES Act, that is not affecting those benefits. Now the reemployment benefits are a little bit different. With unemployment and with the additional $600 a week that COVID-19 pay that the federal government is kicking in on the unemployment, that does count for SSI for unearned income as it would normally. So if all this crisis thing hadn't happened and it would have been a normal situation where somebody was on SSI and were working and then they went on unemployment, it counts exactly the same as that. It is unearned income toward your SSI. Now, if you had somebody in that situation and they just happened to be in a case where their business closed because of the COVID-19, then they could possibly be getting the additional $600 a week COVID-19 federal pay on top of their unemployment benefit. So in that case, they may be getting, a lot more than what they would be getting on SSI. So it'd be a lot more beneficial for them to get the unemployment benefit and not get the SSI. Their SSI would go into suspension because they would be over income on unearned income. But then as soon as the Social Security benefits ended or they went back to work, then their SSI would kick back in based on their income situation at the time. But so that would go into suspension in that situation.
Thanks, Barry, for going through that information. Just a couple of things to note here before we go through these scenarios. Tynell added in the chat 2 documents. One is that IRWE request template that Barry mentioned, and then another is a comparison of the 2 federal programs, SSI and SSDI. You should see a little blue download underneath that document. You'll have to click that and then save it to your computer. With that, you can certainly let me know in the chat box and I'll help you with that. And then the third document that she put in there compares the different work incentives. So any questions at this time before we start working on the scenarios? And again, in regard to the stimulus payments and the unemployment insurance, the pandemic unemployment insurance, there is a document that you were sent in your handouts in the email that goes through a lot of information about how those impact the different benefits. And there's also resources at the end for you to find further information. Okay, Barry, I'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, so we're going to go through some kind of brief case scenarios to kind of show these examples that we've been talking about in real life. So in the first one, Jay tells his team that he wants to work full-time. He's receiving $783 a month in SSI benefits. What would you tell Jay? Now this is the sing-along part where everybody joins in. If I could sing, I would do it, but it's, of course, you would let Jay know that, he could certainly try working full-time because he's in a great situation to do that. There's a lot of safety nets involved. There's a lot of work incentives that would really help him out, where he could go out and try to work full-time and see how it goes. He's certainly going to come out ahead financially. And when you look at the calculation sheet, you know, you can show him the bottom line that, yeah, he's definitely going to come out ahead.
And sorry, Barry, I should have mentioned it, for the scenarios that Barry's going through, again, this is a little bit different since we're on Zoom and not with you face to face. If you'd like to answer the question, you can type the answer in chat and I'll read it, or you can unmute yourself and answer the question too.
Okay, well, I'll make it more difficult next time and I won't give everybody the answer. Okay, so shall we go to the second one? Okay, Bailey has been offered a job making $12 an hour, working 20 hours a week. Calculate Bailey's estimated SSI payment if she takes the job. So those people that are math whizzes out there and you've already got this figured out in your head, you can just type it right in the chat box. Or you can use your calculation sheet and see how you do. I can't see the chat box, so I don't know if anybody's put an answer in yet.
There are no answers there, Barry, so I think you can go ahead and move ahead.
Okay, we'll move ahead. Okay, so this gives a good example of kind of what I was talking about earlier, the kind of different boxes in the SSI calculation sheet. So you see the top box there is about unearned income. Well, she doesn't have any unearned income, so we're not counting that. Her gross earned income, we came up with $1,039. That was her $12 an hour times 20 hours a week times 4.33 weeks. So that's how we came up with $1,039 gross, approximately, that she's making a month. So first she gets the $20 general income exclusion, which lowers it down to $1,019. Then she gets the $65 earned income exclusion, which lowers it down to $954. And then if we go down a little further, you'll see that they divide that by 2 because they only count half of it. So that leaves her total countable earned income at around $477. So then if you continue down to where her SSI base rate is $783, they subtract the $477 countable income, which leaves her adjusted SSI payment at $305. So then the bottom part where you figure out her financial income, she has an adjusted SSI payment of $305. She has gross earned income of $1,039. So she has a total financial income of $1,345 a month. Does that make sense?
Barry, while you were going through that, we did have a couple of answers come up in the chat box. And if I were with you personally, Nancy Miller, we'd be giving you some candy. So we're just throwing some virtual candy at you here. So Nancy did get the information right in terms of what her total countable earned income is and what her adjusted SSI check would be. So great job, Nancy. And it looks like we have somebody else, but it's showing up as a generic name, so I can't tell who it is there. So thank you for playing that little game. It's a little hard to do that when we're live on here. Are there any questions for Barry about the calculation sheet or the scenario he just went through?
Okay, shall we go to Bailey question 2?
Yep, I don't have any other questions, and doesn't look like anybody wants to ask any questions live, so go ahead, Barry.
Okay, so after she starts her job, Bailey contacts you and says that because of her disability, she needs some help with some tasks on the job, and she's going to pay a personal assistant to help her 5 hours per week, and she's going to pay the assistant $9.30 an hour. Which work incentive might she be able to use, and how will this affect Bailey's SSI?
So again, you can type the answer in the chat box, or you can take yourself off mute and answer too. Jen Trenhill says an IRWE. Is that correct, Barry?
That is correct. And I'll add one little hint in here just to help you out in the calculation sheet. Well, the way that we would figure how much Bailey's IRWE is by the $5 an hour or 5 hours a week that she's needing the help times the $9.30 an hour that she's paying times 4.33 weeks. So that's the dollar amount that you're going to come up with for the monthly amount that she's going to use for her IRWE when she submits that to Social Security.
And Jen, we owe you some candy the next time we see you. Barry, there's a question. Can you explain the 4.33?
Yeah, that is basically to account for the weeks when there's more paydays or more work days in the month. You know, like some work months may have 20 work days, some may have 22, some may have 24. Some may, when you're calculating someone's work income, it's because they may have more paychecks actually on some months. If they have, maybe they're getting paid every 2 weeks, but it just happens to fall where there's 3 paydays in a month. So you're kind of figuring on the high side. You know, it's an estimate, but it's better to figure a little bit on the high side than to figure on the low side in situations like that. So that's the number that they use to kind of come up with that estimate.
And then Barry, we do have an answer for the second part of that second question there. How will this impact Bailey's SSI? So Nancy Miller says her SSI goes up about 100. I think what she meant to say was goes down about $100.
Well, her SSI would be higher, yes, so that's correct. So her countable income would be less. So maybe we can move to the next slide and we'll go through, or the next one, and we'll see. I'm sorry, Nancy, I see what you're saying. Yep. Yep, I think you're on the right track here. In her case, she gets the $1,039 gross earned income. She gets the $20 general earned income exclusion, which leaves $1,019. Then she gets the $65 earned income exclusion, which brings it down to $954. Then she gets to deduct the $201 that she's paying her attendant each month, which brings it down to $752. And then they divide that by 2 because they only count half of that. So that leaves you with 376 actual countable income. So then in the next section where you have her base SSI rate is $783. She has $376 countable income, so that makes her adjusted SSI payment $406. So then in the bottom section where you're figuring the bottom line and what she actually has in her pocket at the end of the month, she gets a adjusted SSI payment of $406. She has her wages from her job of $1,039, but then you have to subtract the $201 that she's paying out of her own pocket for her attendant, but that still leaves her with $1,244 in her total financial outcome. Does that make sense?
Okay, Barry, just to kind of give kudos to a couple other people here, Angela Martin also added that there would be $376.43 deducted from the SSI, and that's correct. As you saw from Barry's example, that's the total countable income. And then just to clarify, again, I'm sorry, Nancy, I didn't understand what you typed there. Yes, when you compare this to the previous calculation, her SSI will be $100 more because of that IRWE. So you can see the benefit of having those work incentives for people because their SSI ends up being more.
Yes, very good. If we had prizes, you'd have prizes.
Yes, yes, we usually do. I mean, I don't want to make you feel bad since we're not doing this in person, but typically we do give you candy when you're answering questions.
Okay, shall we go to the next one?
Yeah, no questions in the chat box unless there's anybody who wants to speak up and ask a question.
Okay, so Katie is in a transition program for 18 to 21-year-olds. She's getting $783 a month in SSI. She starts working part-time at a nearby arcade, and she's going to work after school from 4 to 7 Monday through Friday. Will this job affect her SSI amount? And does she need to report her income to Social Security?
Again, you can type answers in the chat box. Yes and yes, Barry, from Teresa Marzon, Whitley Hubrook. Cindy Kirschman says it won't affect her income, but she probably should report. Student earned income exclusion, somebody says.
Well, and I think they may be right or wrong. It all depends. We, in this case, for one, don't know whether she's actually been approved for student earned income exclusion. We're assuming, yes, that she should qualify if she's in a transition program and she's just working after school. So it sounds like she's probably in school enough that she should be getting that student earned income exclusion. But I've dealt with many circumstances over the years that sometimes those don't get approved just automatically. For example, here this last school year, the program in Rapid City was called the Work Adjustment Program or something. I know they've changed the name a couple of times, but it didn't sound like it was school. So people were sending in their pay stubs and saying, hey, I'm in the Work Adjustment Program. And it didn't show up as, that they were in school, because the people behind the desk in Social Security didn't know that that was Rapid City School District Adult Transition Program. So we had to actually show that that's what they were in. So yes, had she been approved, you're absolutely right. The little amount that she is going to make working on that part-time job after school definitely wouldn't be over the $1,900 that they're excluding each month with a student earned income exclusion. So yeah, probably not going to affect her SSI if she's approved for the student earned income exclusion. And should she report it? Yes, that's one of those sing-along things. Everybody should be saying, yes, report your wages. Always report your wages.
Okay, Barry, just a couple things here. We did have a question from Dave Halverson. Has she already earned more than $7,670?
Good point, Dave. We don't know what time of the year this all happened, right? So she might have already earned that much.
Also a question, how do you show that a student is in a transition program or in school?
I know a lot of times we've used IEP, which usually is pretty detailed and shows how much somebody's actually attending. Although I've used a lot of different things. I've used a letter on school letterhead from the teacher that said this person is, for example, if they're in a transition program, they are working part-time, the teacher was able to say they go to school from this hour to this hour, and then they go to a work training site from this time to this time. So that came right from the teacher on the school letterhead. That worked for us. I did have a student one time who was homeschooled, and they had to provide their curriculum of what they were doing and how many times a day that they were actually working on it. One thing that I do want to mention while we're on student earned income exclusion that is another thing that's kind of relevant right now is for kids that are out of school, obviously, but they plan on returning in the fall. So in those cases, yes, they're still eligible for student earned income exclusion. That would still be the case if none of this had happened and we were just on a regular school year and somebody was working in the summer, but they were going to go back to school in the fall. As long as they're an enrolled student and they're planning on going back to school, that student earned income exclusion continues on through the summer months. So during this time that no schools are going on, we're all assuming that yes, in the fall, they're going to get to go back to school and, you know, they're still enrolled students, so they still get to claim that.
Cindy Kirschman asked if I could go over the hours again. So for college, it's regularly attending is, you know, the general rule of thumb is 8 hours a week per semester. And then for 7th through 12th grades, high school, it is 12 hours. Now, again, you know, there are different situations and, you know, exceptions and things like that. Sometimes there is a significant illness that causes a student not to be able to be in school for a certain period of time. You know, those are exceptions that can be made. Homeschooling does count too. That's a question that's often asked. Rebecca Thompson did mention that she's written plenty of letters confirming a student is in the transition program. And so that is positive that she's had some good luck there, and they're working in project skills, for example. Shayna Gusso asked, does project search fit into this? I am a first-year teacher and I am new to all of this. So it really, when it comes to project search, is probably going to depend on your local office, Shayna. But certainly, you know, in a number of situations that can count as a program that they're in, an 18 to 21 program that they're in, and they are working in this in the case that you're asking. So yes, that is a potential for project search to fit into that.
Okay, Doug. Doug receives $522 in SSI each month and lives with his parents. His friend told him that his friend's sister gets $900 in benefits and that Doug should be getting more money each month. So why is Doug getting less than the full benefit amount each month? And can Doug get the $900 in benefits each month, like his friend's sister?
Doug isn't married is one of the comments. Food and shelter is being provided. Perhaps he's on Title II. He's living with parents. The friend is claiming rent. In-kind support, deeming.
Yeah, I think those are all good answers because for one, we don't know a lot of the information about Doug at this time. We don't even know how old Doug is or any of that. But so those are all good answers. Those are all possibilities. Just looking at the number 522, typically what you're going to see if somebody, you know, let's say they're in an adult transition program and they're still living with their parents and they tell you they're getting 522, chances are that's because of in-kind support and maintenance, because what Social Security typically does, if somebody isn't paying their fair share, they call it, then they reduce their SSI by 1/3. And so 1/3 of 783 is 522. So you see a lot of people with 522. But yeah, a lot of those other scenarios are definitely possibilities. And so that's again a case where you really have to kind of look and see, you know, what are the specifics of that situation. And could Doug get $900 a month given his situation?
Again, you can type your answer in the chat box.
Not in benefits, he couldn't, because if he's on SSI, the maximum amount is 783. And if he's on a combined, he's still not going to get $900 in benefits.
That is correct, yes. If he's just on SSI, only on SSI, he's not going to get more than the $783. So his friend's sister must be on a different type of Social Security, apparently, to get the $900. So go on to the next one. Kelly calls and is worried about a letter that she received from Social Security. She tells you that the letter says she's being kicked off her benefits. The letter says that her SSI check will be decreased to 0 and that she was overpaid $3,915 and she will have to pay that back to Social Security. The letter also says that Kelly was over the resource limit from March to July. Kelly tells you that she just started a part-time job and she's going to quit her job so that her SSI will start again. Is Kelly actually kicked off of benefits? And should Kelly stop working? And what do you think caused her overpayment?
Not seeing anything in the chat quite yet, Barry. The over resource limit caused the overpayment. Someone says she would not be kicked off as she would continue Medicaid.
Should I be commenting on these as they're coming in?
Looks like we don't have any others right now, so you can go ahead and take it over, Barry.
Okay, well, you're correct. It's probably because of the resource limit that she went over. Because if she got a letter saying she was over the resources from March to July, probably what happened then, just kind of reading between the lines here, it looks like she had too many resources back in maybe April. And so she wasn't supposed to get her SSI check in, or I guess in February, she would have been over. And then so she wasn't supposed to get her SSI check in March, April, May, June, or July. So 783 times that many months is actually $3,915. So you could kind of look at it that way and say, yeah, definitely she probably went over resources prior to March, and then she wasn't supposed to get those SSI checks. So that's why they're saying she's over. I know there was another comment and I was going to say something about it. What was it again? The other?
Not kicked off as she would continue Medicaid.
But in that case, though, Medicaid also has a $2,000 resource limit, and she didn't lose her SSI because she worked her way off of it. So if she lost her SSI because of resources, she's going to lose her Medicaid because of resources. So she's probably not only going to get a letter from Social Security, she's also going to get one from DSS saying, you no longer have Medicaid.
But she hasn't lost it for 12 consecutive months, so she really hasn't lost anything, correct?
Well, she received it, right? So she was getting these checks all along. And then she got a letter, because Social Security doesn't do things instantly. Sometimes they do things 6 months later that you find out, looking back, maybe something different should have happened, right? So they finally found out that she was over resources back in February. And then they sent her the letter saying, oh, by the way, we shouldn't have sent you those 5 months of checks that we sent you. So yeah, she does owe that money back. And she will be in suspension, but as soon as she spends her resource limit back down again, then her SSI will start back up. And with overpayment situations, there's room for negotiation on that as to when you got it spent down and when your check should start back up again. But just generally speaking, if somebody were in a situation like that and they owed, $4,000 back to Social Security. With SSI, they can only withhold 10%. So when her SSI comes back in, if she can prove that, yes, my resources are down below $2,000 now, or I took my money and I put it in an ABLE account or whatever, so now she doesn't have those countable resources and she can show that to Social Security, then her SSI will kick back in, but they'll probably take out $78 because they're going to withhold the 10% to get their $4,000 back. But again, that's something that you have to work with Social Security to get that kind of repayment plan set up and to prove that your resources are paid down, and that's going to take some communication with Social Security.
I think the last person that just commented too, so when she wouldn't have been eligible for Medicaid for those March through July, but Medicaid's not going to go back and say you owe us money like SSI is going to. Medicaid is going to say, oops, you weren't eligible for Medicaid during those months. Oh well. But since now we found out that you're not eligible for SSI because you're over resources still, then the Medicaid's going to stop at that same time until she goes down below resources, like Barry said. So, but when that check starts back up, so will the Medicaid. If that makes sense. I can't remember who made the comment over
Thank
talking.
you. That was me, Heather. Thank you very much for clarifying that.
So should Kelly stop working?
No, she should not stop working. We should help her get under her resources.
Yeah, she would definitely be even more worse off stop working, because then she's not going to have her wages and she's not going to have her Social Security. And, you know, I'm sure it's confusing to Kelly, but, you know, we just have to explain that, you know, it wasn't the work that made your SSI stop, it was the resources. And, you know, that's easily taken care of. You know, get those resources and put them in an ABLE account, or, you know, do something with it. But, you know, then your SSI will start back up, but, you know, that doesn't affect your work.
Since we were just talking about Medicaid, one thing I might add to in regard to, and I think, and Barry did touch on this a bit with the stimulus payments and the pandemic unemployment insurance, but because of some provisions that were put in place at the federal level and decisions that states could make in terms of Medicaid during this time, and South Dakota, essentially all 50 states decided to take the opportunity from the feds, but basically during this time, no one will lose their Medicaid during the pandemic, and it should go through the month of the emergency declaration. So, you know, we're in May, the emergency declaration hasn't been lifted yet, but if it is lifted during this month, then it will end this month, and then June, all the rules will be back into place. So we just got to kind of keep our eye on when that happens, because that is going to change things with all the rules, and it's going to change pretty quickly. So we have to make sure our beneficiaries understand all of that. Just a couple of logistics, and we'll stay on here for a little bit in case people want to ask additional questions. Again, if you didn't get the handouts, you can include your name and email in the chat. We'll get those sent out to you. Hopefully you had the opportunity to download those extra handouts that Tynell placed in the chat. And then after the training, either later today or tomorrow, if you registered, you should receive an evaluation. And in that evaluation, you'll have to type the 2 words that you saw on the screen. Remember, those were tree and building. And once you complete that evaluation, at the end, you'll provide your contact information, and we'll send out the certificate to you so that you can use that for your CESP or other certifications. And the evaluation really does help us understand if we taught you some of the basic concepts on SSI and Medicaid, and then helps us work on trainings in the future. We are hoping that everything will be back to normal next spring, and we'll be able to hold these again in person. These are types of trainings that typically work better when you're in person and are more interactive when we have the smaller groups. But we hope that this provided you at least some new information for those of you who are new to your positions, and a refresher for those of you who have been around a while and have been working with beneficiaries who are working or interested in work. Barry or Tynell, did you want to add anything else?
Yep, just want to say that if you didn't register, you won't be able to get an evaluation because I will be pulling the emails off of the registration from Zoom.
So if you didn't register, you could go out and do that, and it will add your email.
I don't think I have any more to add.
Okay, well, Barry and Tynell and I will stay on for a little bit in case anybody has questions. Otherwise, we hope everybody has a great rest of your week. And hopefully you can join us for the other 2 webinars on the 12th for SSDI and Medicare, and then on the 19th for other public benefits, overpayments, MOD, and ABLE. And again, make sure you register for those. And yes, Marva, there are only 2 magic words, tree and building. And there will be a question on the evaluation where you have to enter those 2 words.